Arratsaldeon guztioi, good afternoon everyone. My name is Jordana Izaguirre and I'm the Director of Basque Trade and Investment in Washington, D.C. Welcome to this webinar on FDA regulations. As you all know, the US is the largest market in the biohealth industry, around 30% of the global market. It offers a lot of opportunities, but it's also a very regulated market that follows complex and very technical rules and regulations. This is why we have organized this event today, to learn directly from FDA representatives. Today, we're honored to have two experts from the Food and Drug Administration. Dr. Ritu Nalubola, Director of the FDA Europe Office, and Claudia Luati, Policy Advisor at the FDA Europe Office. Thank you both so much. Ritu and Claudia will provide a presentation, and there will be time for questions at the end. But before we start, we're also honored to welcome another guest, Linda Caruso. Linda is a Deputy Senior Commercial Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Madrid. The U.S. Embassy has been a great partner for Basque Trade, and we're very happy to have Linda with us today. Linda will provide a brief overview of what they do and how they can help and be of assistance to you all. With that said, I would like to welcome Linda. Linda, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello. I'm having a little bit of trouble in listening and hearing.
Okay. Can you hear me though? Maybe we had the same issue that we had a little bit at the beginning. I don't know if Joseba can help us. Yeah, we can hear you perfectly. Maybe, Linda, you can just go ahead, right?
Well, thank you so much, Jordana. I am so thrilled to be here, and I'm grateful for the interest that we have now with the Basque Trade Agency, and this is going to be very interesting. So to start my presentation, I would like to just say that I'm with the U.S. Embassy in Madrid, and I'm the commercial attaché, and I'm just, as I said, very happy to be here. It's a great opportunity to address companies, Spanish companies that are interested in this market, but also possibly, potentially interested in moving or investing in the United States so that you bring your business closer to the market that we're going to be talking about today. The role of my office, I wanted to just give you a little introduction of what our office can do for you if you're a Spanish business, and especially for those companies that are thinking of opening up an office or expanding into the U.S. The commercial service is part of the Department of Commerce, and we have an office here in Madrid, and we actually have over 80 offices outside of the US and 100 offices inside the US. So basically what we do is two things. We help US companies export goods and services, and we help Spanish companies find answers to your questions or find the right people that you need to connect with in the United States if you're interested in investment. The map here shows you where our offices are located. We work with companies in the long term and the short term. We defend U.S. interests. So if companies are having a hard time, there's a barrier to enter the market. That's when we as diplomats help the U.S. companies. But I would just like, if you forget everything else I've said, I will say in this presentation, just remember you have a friend in the U.S. Embassy. If you need advice or guidance in what to do next if you're considering the United States. So I'll give you just a little bit more details to entice you or to make you think about why the United States. You probably already know that the U.S. is the #1 investment destination for countries all over the world. And we think that it's a great idea for you to start even thinking about, because even though it's the home to the largest amount of FDI, foreign direct investment, it also is the most attractive destination for Spanish companies outside of the European Union. So mostly Spanish companies look to expand within Europe, and they think they're going to be that they're going to be after Europe. The U.S. is the #1 choice. It's our number 10. Spain still makes the top 10 as far as investors. And the statistics show that Spanish investment was in about 86, almost nearly $90 billion. But just because it's a great market doesn't mean investment market. It's the largest medical device market in the world. So it's also a huge medical device market, projected to reach 222 billion in just a few years by 2027. The U.S. population needs medical devices. Our population is growing older, as is the population in many countries in Europe. And it's not only a strategic market because of its size, but the innovation that happens and the R&D spending that happens in the United States is outsized compared to other countries. So your company would benefit from being in the environment where a lot of money goes into R&D and global competitiveness is #1. There's also many clusters that occur in various states around the U.S. So the tradition of close collaboration in the U.S. has a knock-on effect to other companies. So if you put yourself and swim in those waters, then it kind of affects the growth of your company, and you'll be able to reap the benefits of innovation that is still very strong in the United States. So what can we do for you in Madrid? We can counsel, whatever, just ask. I mean, we don't charge for our advice, and so it would always, I think, behoove you to check with us first if you have ideas or questions, and we can just guide you and put you into the right hands in the United States. If you have your heart set on a particular state, you really want to go to California or New York, we know who you need to talk to, which is the economic development offices, and we have those economic development offices on our speed dial in our phones. And we put together events on regular basis, so we'll be working with our friends at the Basque Trade Agency to bring some of those states through town, so that if you have particular questions about a particular industry and or state, then we can help put you in the right, put you in touch with the right people. So we do have an event that that is every year and that is very interesting for many companies, and it's the Select USA Investment Summit. It happens every year. This year it's May 1st. So if you're interested at all, please let us know. The Select USA is a agency of the Department of Commerce, and they can put you in touch. They can tell you where the clusters are and give you legal and financial advice and help get you even farther when you have questions. So any startup companies, I don't know if there's any startup companies in the audience today, but if there are, then Select USA even has a Pitch Fest, something very special for technology companies. We have just learned about a training for venture capital. So if you are interested in learning kind of like a venture capital 101, I can send you a link for a free course. And this Select Tech, as part of our Select USA Summit that's happening in May, is kind of like a contest where you pitch to see against companies from all over the world, and venture capitalists are there as part of the judging panel. And really, I have to say that Select USA has had Spanish winners on the podium every year that Select Tech has happened. It's happened for the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm very proud of Spanish companies for their innovation, and it's just very, I think it's heartwarming to see how much mileage you can get from programs such as this. So please, I know that I'm not speaking about the medical device industry, and I'm eager to hear more. So I would welcome our guest from the FDA, and I won't talk any longer. I just want you to know that we are eager to help you and would love to see more Spanish companies either come to the Select USA in May, or just let us know what answers we can give you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jordana.
Thank you very much, Linda. We appreciate your presentation and your support. From a personal experience, I can say that it is an absolute pleasure to work with you and your team at the U.S. Embassy. We're now going to proceed with the FDA portion of the webinar. I would like to welcome again Dr. Ritu Nalubola and Claudia Luati. Thank you so much to both of you. To the public, a reminder that if there are any questions, please feel free to add them on the chat on the right side of the presentation, and we will do our best to address them at the end at the Q&A portion. Ritu, Claudia, you can take over now. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Jordana. Many thanks to you and to the organizers and colleagues at Basque Trade and Investment for inviting us today and for the opportunity for us to share some information about our office, as well as the main topic of interest, the regulatory framework and some of the requirements for marketing medical devices in the United States. Before we start the presentation, just by way of introduction, I'm the director of the FDA Europe office. I've been with FDA about 22 years. We are based primarily in Brussels. I'm a biochemist by training, and most recently, before taking this position for now about 4 years, I was in the commissioner's office, in the policy office, working on various different science policy issues. I'll also have Claudia introduce herself.
Yes, hello. I'm Claudia Luati. I'm a policy advisor at the FDA Europe office. I joined the office about 6 years ago. Before that, I was working in the private sector, and I have a political science background.
Thanks. So I think if we can get the slides started, we'll walk through those. Okay, thank you very much. So just to give you a little bit of outline, given that we'll be spending about an hour or so online today, just so you know what's coming up, we'll start with a very brief introduction about FDA and the Europe office. I always like to take an opportunity when we talk with our stakeholders to share with you what we do here. Many stakeholders in Europe, still may not be aware that we do have on-site presence in the region. So I'll share with you a little bit about the office, And then we'll spend, of course, the bulk of the time on medical devices regulation in the United States, also touch on some of the new emerging issues related to digital health and how FDA as a regulatory agency is adapting to facilitate innovation, at the same time ensure the safety of these novel products. So about FDA, I'm sure many of you already know, so if you indulge me a little bit, I'll tell you a little about the agency. We are actually an agency within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We are one of the units within the broader department that deals with health issues. Our remit is very broad. We regulate many different types of products, ranging from medicines, which we refer to in the United States as drugs, human and veterinary, both medicines to humans and animals. We also regulate biological products, including vaccines, also medical devices, as you know. And then there are centers within FDA that are also responsible for the safety of United States food supply. We share that responsibility with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We also have the remit to ensure the safety of cosmetics, dietary supplements, and of course, tobacco products is also another area that falls under FDA's broad portfolio. We are a large institution, about 18,000 full-time employees and growing. And we have offices all around the United States, including laboratories. The FDA does a lot of regulatory science, which is somewhat of a unique term of art. We do research that specifically addresses these questions that are important for regulatory decision making, and that's the regulatory science that we refer to. We do have international offices, ours being one of them. And that is a reflection of the globalized supply chain of many of FDA-regulated products. We have foreign posts in India, in China, and regional offices in Europe, primarily based here in Brussels, as well as a regional office in Latin America. And these posts were started by FDA over a decade ago now, primarily thinking about the types of products that are entering the United States marketplace, the source of these products. And so these were strategically located in specific regions and countries around the world. Our office sits within a broader umbrella office within FDA. And this green on the lower part of the slide, the Office of Policy, Legislation, and International Affairs. That's where all of the FDA foreign offices are situated organizationally, and that office reports into the Office of the Commissioner. And this is just by way of reference. FDA's product area, programmatic questions and issues are dealt within centers, which are all separated by the product areas that we regulate. And this other green box on the screen here is the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. And that's where the medical devices programmatic staff and the technical expertise is all located in that center that has a responsibility to review and approve all of the medical devices. Before I speak a little bit on the overview of the medical devices regulation, about our office, we are primarily based in Brussels. We do have location also in within the European Medicines Agency in Amsterdam, as well as staff at headquarters. Unlike some of the other foreign posts, a lot of work that we do here in Europe has to do with policy convergence, alignment of policy formulations, and that's simply a reflection of the maturity of the regulatory systems that we have in Europe. We work across various institutions at the EU level as well as at the EU member states. And at the end of the presentation, we'll show you a link to our office. Feel free to go on the web page to learn more about what we do here in Brussels. And we are situated within the US mission to the European Union. So as part of the US government umbrella offices, we do support the broader US government mission in the EU. Now we'll turn to the regulation of medical devices in the United States. I'll give a very brief high-level overview, and then I'll turn to Claudia to go over some of the specifics about the requirements for medical devices, what is it that you should be mindful of, and how we do the different classifications, and what under each classification, what the specific requirements are prior to marketing a product. So our devices authority, and when I say devices, it's medical devices particularly. These are all regulated by FDA under specific authorities that are given to us by Congress. Our parent authority is what we refer to as the FDNC Act, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And the medical devices amendments to this act started in 1976. And that's the first one that gave us the authority to provide reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness of medical devices. Under this act also was when we created a 3-class risk-based classification systems that we will talk about a little bit more. Under this 1976 act also, or amendment, also got the authority to establish specific requirements for the manufacturing of medical devices, including, for example, the GMP, quality systems regulations, and then the authority to ban specific devices under certain conditions. Then there were subsequent laws that were enacted, but the one that we wanted to mention is the one in 2002 with the user fee programs. That was the first medical device user fee modernization act that granted FDA the authority to collect user fees for select medical devices for pre-market submissions that FDA reviews. Another important point is under this amendment, we also then had were able to establish the Office of Combination Products, which I think will be of interest to many in the medical devices sector, especially with some of the new digital health technologies that touch on combination products having both a device and a drug component. Our device regulations are all coded in specific sections of Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR. Parts 800 to 1050 are where the device requirements are all written out. And then there are other parts of the CFR that talk about general regulatory provisions that apply to all FDA regulated products, including medical devices. So those are the specific parts of the CFR that would be most relevant to this audience. In addition to regulations, we also have guidance documents. So FDA issues guidance documents mainly to help industry to comply with the regulatory requirements. So whereas regulations are requirements, meaning you must abide by those and comply with those, the guidance documents are more elaborative. They explain what the regulation is and they give you some guidance on how to comply with those requirements. So guidance documents from that standpoint are non-binding, and they elaborate on specific laws and regulations that apply to a specific product or an issue. And medical devices, as well as for other products, we have several guidance documents that we've issued for industry, and all of those are posted on our webpage. Broadly speaking, these are the regulatory requirements for manufacturers of medical devices to be marketed in the United States. This is a very high level list. Claudia will go through some of the details on the pre-market submissions. But generally speaking, these are the requirements that you should be aware of. So all medical devices establishments or manufacturers, both domestic and foreign, as well as distributors, must register their establishments with FDA. And as part of this registration, you must also notify or designate a U.S. agent, meaning an agent that is either resides in the United States or has some place of business in the United States. And the United States agent has specific responsibilities, primarily to be a point of contact for FDA. And then medical devices are also required to be listed, and this listing should include manufacturers, contract manufacturers, repackagers or labelers, remanufacturers, as well as other types of listings. And there's more information again on our webpage. In addition to that, each type of device, depending on the class within which it is designated, have specific requirements, either pre-market notification or pre-market approval, as well as some types of devices that are exempt from pre-market notification. And that's this third bullet point is the one specifically that Claudia is going to discuss a little bit more detail, so I can skip that piece. Once you have a classification for your type of device and determine which type of pre-market submission is required, the types of submission that each of these entail really reflect the type of or the potential for risk that would be associated with that device for its particular intended use. And so, for example, for a pre-market notification under a 510K, the type of submission you would be required to make would be very different from a submission that would be required for a Class 3 pre-market approval product. In addition, we also have something called IDE devices, and these are investigational device exemptions for clinical studies. So these would be, for example, the types of products that are specifically intended for investigation in support of a submission for a PMA or 510K. And so these would be exempt from certain types of requirements. And then we also have the quality systems regulation, and these are the ones that establish specific methods that are used and the facilities and the controls that are used for designing, purchasing, manufacturing, labeling, and other activities related to medical devices. And manufacturing facilities are required to undergo FDA inspections to ensure compliance with the quality systems regulations. There's also labeling requirements for each of the medical devices depending on the type of product. And these labels can be descriptive and informational literature, as well as labels that are particularly affixed to with the product. Finally, we have the medical device reporting requirements, and these are intended for FDA to be aware of any adverse impacts that manufacturers are aware of associated with their products. There is a requirement for manufacturers to report these to FDA, and the way the reporting is done is also established on our webpage under the medical device reporting program. I know this is a lot, but we'll go through a little bit more detail on the specifics of the pre-market notifications and the submissions. But please know that all of this is information on all of this is available on our webpage. So with that, I will turn to Claudia to describe more about what it takes to bring a device to the United States market.
Yeah, thank you, Ritu. Indeed, we're going to go through some of the steps in order to put your devices on the market. So the first step is to classify your device, understand the applicable regulatory controls based on the class and on the type of device that you're marketing. The second step is to select and prepare the correct pre-market submission, again, based on the class of device. And then 3 is to send your pre-market submission to the FDA and interact with FDA staff during the review. There are several ways of doing so. And step 4 is to comply with the applicable regulatory controls, such as the establishment registration and device listing. So the first step is really the device determination. And here is for you to determine whether your product fulfills the definition of a device according to the law. So here is the definition. So it's any instrument, apparatus, machine, implant, inventor, reagent that diagnoses, cures, mitigates, treats, or prevents disease or condition that is intended to affect the structure of or any function of the body of man or other animals and doesn't achieve its primary intended purposes through chemical action. So it's not a drug. And here the definition excludes certain software functions. FDA has published specific guidance on software to determine which software are subject to FDA oversight and which are not. I think Rachel will touch on that a little bit later. So here really what's important in terms of this step on device determination is to define the intended use. So that means the general purpose or the function of the product. And its indications for use. So that describe the disease or condition the product will diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent, and of course, the intended patient population. So how do you define the classification of your product? Once you know that your product actually falls within the definition of a device, you have to understand the classification and how FDA how your product is regulated. So to do that, there is a product classification database. That's the best way to find the applicable regulatory requirements for your product. And I think FDA has classified about several hundreds of devices, and you can find your product within this classification if there is a similar product already on the US market. So as Ritu was saying, there are 3 classes of devices. So of course, it's a risk-based approach. So class 1 devices are the lowest risk devices. They're generally subject to general controls. And of course, that will also determine the pre-market submission that is needed. Generally, a lot of class 1 devices are exempt from any pre-market submission. Others have to go through 510K. We'll look at what a 510K entails a little bit later. Class 2 are the moderate risk devices. They're subject to general and special controls if available. And usually the most common submission type is a 510K. Some class 2 low-risk devices are exempt as well. There is a specific list of devices that are exempt from those requirements, and of course, it's available on the website. The class 3 devices are the highest risk devices, and so of course those are the ones that are subject to the most oversight. So they're subject to general controls as well as pre-market approval. And that's a separate type of pre-market submission that we will look at later. So here on this slide, you have some examples of general controls. So Ritu has mentioned some of them already: labeling, reporting, registration, listing. So those, are applicable for all devices. And you also have some example of special controls. So for certain types of devices, such as performance standards, post-market surveillance, registries, etc. So classification will generally indicate the regulatory pathway that is required for the device. So basically what you need to do in order to be able to put your product on the market. As I was saying, some devices do not need a pre-market submission, and you have here the link to those devices that are exempt. So we'll go through those most common types of pre-market submissions, as in the 510K, the PMA, the de novo classification request, as well as the humanitarian device exemption. So starting with the 510K pre-market notification, just a little bit of vocabulary here. This is not an approval that you would get through a 510K. This is a clearance. So we are talking about devices that are cleared, not approved when they go through this specific pathway. So this is the submission type for low and moderate risk devices. And the objective here is to assess substantial equivalence between the new device that you are putting on the market and a device that is already legally marketed in the United States that we call a predicate. So the demonstration in your 510K really is aims to show that the new device is as safe and effective as the predicate. So that you have to establish that the intended use is the same and that any differences in technological characteristics do not raise different questions in terms of safety and effectiveness. And of course, FDA will review the scientific methods that are used to evaluate those differences in technological characteristics and performance data. So there are several types of 510K notifications. So the traditional one, which is the usual one, the special one, and abbreviated one. So quickly on the abbreviated one, it's a submission that relies mostly on guidance documents, demonstration of compliance with special controls, or compliance with standards. So it's a slightly abbreviated process in order to simplify the 510K submission. And then the special 510K is made to facilitate submission in case of changes to an existing device that is already authorized. There are specific guidance, of course, guidance documents that are available on our website that explain the different types and then explain also what is required as part of the submission. There is a program, the third-party review program, that enables manufacturers to go through a third party to have an initial assessment of their 510K submission before, which is relatively similar to the notified body process, but the difference is that FDA still needs to review that third-party review and provide the final determination within 30 days of receiving the recommendation from the third party. So in terms of, one question that we often get is, do we need to submit a new 510K in case there is a change to a device? So there's guidance as well for this. The language is relatively broad. A change, a new submission would be required if a change where the modification would affect the safety and effectiveness of the device, or if the intended use changes. But again, I can refer you to the guidance. So that's it for the 510K. We'll move on to the pre-market approval application. So this is the marketing application for highest risk devices. So it's the most stringent type of device marketing application. So really mostly for those class 3 devices. So unlike the 510K, which is really a comparison between an existing device and a new one, here for the pre-market approval, it's a standalone application. So the evidence is standalone and is not made in reference to another device. So the PMA approval is based on a determination by FDA that the PMA contains sufficient valid scientific evidence to assure that the device is safe and effective for its intended use. So there are, of course, administrative elements of a PMA application, but good science and scientific writing are key for the approval of a PMA. And just to reiterate the definition, class 3 devices are those that support a sustained human life, are of substantial importance in preventing impairment of human health, or which present a potential unreasonable risk of illness or injury. And again, here you have a link to the guidance documents, that explain what you need to include in those PMA applications. So the de novo classification request is another pathway that can be interesting. So normally a class 3 device, if there is no similar equivalent device on the market, any device is automatically classified as class 3, which can be a little bit overreaching for those devices for which other types of controls, general or special controls, provide reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness for the intended use. So this is why Congress created the specific pathway for those devices that would not need normally to go through a PMA because they are not of the highest risk. So before you had to submit at first a 510K in order to be able to submit a de novo. It's no longer the case. You can submit your de novo request immediately. So the process for the submission and review of a de novo classification is outlined in a guidance document that was published in 2017. And there's also a specific guidance on acceptance that outlines the criteria for acceptance of the request. So the objective really is to reduce the regulatory burden for companies and to make it a little bit easier to market those new products that are not so risky as to require a PMA. So, of course, FDA has many ways of interacting with manufacturers. FDA does encourage manufacturers to use this pre-submission system in order to interact with FDA before maybe submitting their de novo classification request. It is possible to ask, for a specific classification in case you're not sure. I very much encourage everybody to make use of those ways of interacting with the agency to get feedback, and make sure that you have the necessary evidence and the necessary information in your submission. So once it is granted, the de novo classification establishes a new device type, along with the classification regulation necessary controls, and the device can then serve as a predicate for future 510K. The humanitarian device exemption, of course, this is very specific for those products that are class 3 devices that are intended to benefit patients with rare diseases or conditions. And here the definition is it affects or is manifested in no more than 8,000 individuals in the US per year. So it's really a very targeted pathway. There are the benefit of this pathway is that the device is exempt from certain effectiveness requirements, but of course there are also certain restrictions in terms of profit and use and use. Yeah. So the way to obtain this humanitarian device exemption, I've put here the link to the webpage where you can find more information, but you must first obtain a humanitarian use device designation from the FDA's Office of Orphan Products Development, and then submit your exemption application to the appropriate FDA pre-market review center. So that's it for the different pre-market submissions. I wanted to say a few words on the quality system regulation amendments. I'm sure you've been following those developments. It's been a few years now that this was expected. So normally, as Ritu was saying, the authority for the quality system regulation for devices is found under Section 520F of the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. So these are the CGMP requirements. And device manufacturers currently must comply with Part 820. There is mapping that was done by FDA with other organizations to compare how the quality system regulation compares with ISO 13485 2016. At the end of this process, of alignment, it's been a few years that it's been in the making. FDA issued a proposed rule to amend the device CGMP requirements of the QS regulation by incorporating by reference the 2016 edition of ISO 13485, and as well as proposing some additional regulations. So I think in the draft that FDA proposed, there are also some clarifications and about how the standard would apply and how FDA interprets some of the definitions. But really, the objective is to help connect and align ISO 13485 with other FDA requirements. So this rule was published this proposed rule was published February 23, 2022. There was a consultation period, and I think a transition time is also foreseen. So this is really the result of FDA's objective to globally harmonize the regulation of devices as much as possible to help provide consistent, safe, and effective devices, contributing to public health and timelier access for patients. So just to close on this, some information to consider when preparing a pre-market submission. One thing that I did not touch upon when I was talking about the pre-market approval, and that I can mention that now is related to inspections, because we did have some questions on inspections. So a pre-approval inspections as part of a PMA application is performed to assess the manufacturer's ability to design and manufacture the device in accordance with the conditions specified in the PMA application and the requirements of the quality system regulation. So those pre-approval inspections would only normally be really foreseen for PMA applications. There is no need for pre-approval inspections on a requirement, at least for pre-approval inspection for a 510K. Those happen usually after once the reviewer has assessed the design controls and the manufacturing processes and controls, and make sure that these are actually established. So some other things here to consider as part of that pre-market submission. So the design controls under the QMS regulation, we mentioned them. Non-clinical testing, of course, you need to comply with good laboratory practices, and FDA strongly encourages, of course, the use of standards. In terms of clinical evidence, I think we've also had a question related to that. So clinical studies are more often conducted to support a PMA. Only a small percentage of 510Ks require clinical data to support the application, but then again, it depends, of course, on each product, and it's difficult to provide a general answer to that, but FDA is there to provide the necessary guidance as well. In terms of use of foreign data, it is possible. There are certain criteria for FDA to be able to accept data that is that comes from studies that were not conducted in the US. So, for example, the foreign data must be applicable to the US population and medical practice. The studies have been performed by clinical investigators of recognized competence, and the data may be considered valid without the need for an on-site inspection by FDA, or if FDA can validate the data through an on-site inspection or other appropriate means. So there's again a guidance document that outlines what are the conditions to accept data that is from studies that are outside of the US. And of course, it's always good to check with FDA if you intend to only use data from studies conducted outside of the US. It's good to check with FDA in advance that this would fulfill their requirements. Then the labeling, Ritu touched on that a little bit. There is this unique device identification. I think you have something similar now in Europe, with some obligations to affix the UDI and to register in the database Good ID. Here are some additional resources, and I think that's almost my last slide. So the Q submission program, as I was saying, this is really a great way to request feedback from the FDA through a pre-submission. So before you go through the process of putting together your application, or at any point you can use the guidance document in order to see what are the best ways of reaching out to the agency. And then there are other additional programs, the Breakthrough Devices Program and the Safer Technology Program, that are specifically designed to promote innovation and to facilitate access for those products that make a difference. And I very much encourage you to look into those options as well. Final considerations, of course, manufacturers, both domestic and foreign, as well as initial distributors of medical devices, must register their establishments with the FDA, as well as identify all known US importers of their devices. So that's something very important. Sometimes we get the question of, I'm a foreign manufacturer, do I need to register? Yes, you do. And there are also specific listing requirements in terms of the devices that you put on the market. As Richard mentioned, foreign manufacturer must designate a US agent in order to facilitate communication with the agency. And of course, manufacturing site is subject to FDA inspection, medical device tracking when required, and adverse event reporting. That's it. I'll turn it back over to you, Ritu, for the section on digital health.
Thank you, Claudia. I know that was a lot of information, but please be assured that nothing we said here is strictly our information. It's all on the webpage. I think the slides that we provided have a lot of links, so please feel free to look on the FDA webpage. And I'll also emphasize that FDA goes to great lengths to be available for questions from our industry stakeholders, especially in a sector such as medical devices, which is fairly complex. And in addition to guidance documents, we do have inboxes where you can submit your questions. Of course, we cannot, walk you through your specific product from start to finish. I think other consultants can provide that kind of service. But if you have specific questions in preparing your submissions, or questions about how the classification works, or where your product fits within the classification, FDA can always respond to those types of questions. One thing we wanted to touch on, because this is, of course, a topic of interest, great interest across the European stakeholders, as well as in the United States, is on digital health and just the technologies per se that are quickly evolving in such a fast-moving field. For FDA, digital health falls under many different offices and centers. The one that we will address today is digital health technologies, and that is the digital tool itself that falls under medical devices definition. There are, when we speak about digital health, there's the actual governance structure and setting up of platforms and digital data oversight, and all of that is outside of what would be considered medical device, unless it's a software that falls under a medical device definition. There's also, when people talk about digital health, how you actually use this data that is generated, the big data, how do you actually use that for regulatory decision making? That is, also under the broad umbrella of digital health, but of course not a medical device. For us, for example, we would consider that as, how do you develop real world evidence when you take real world data, and how do you make that into evidence for decision making? So those aspects of digital health are not something that we would cover here today. We'll specifically focus on digital health technologies and tools that fall under a medical device definition. So FDA realizes that, that we need a tailored approach to regulate digital health, especially considering the landscape of products that are evolving, as well as just the inherent nature of digital health. These are devices that are intended to learn as data is generated. And so the traditional framework of device regulation may or may not be applicable. And FDA's interest has always been to support innovation, facilitate innovation, apply a risk-based approach as we do for traditional medical devices. But in facilitating innovation, how do we also ensure the safety and effectiveness of products? So we started the Digital Health Center of Excellence several years ago now. It's really intended to empower our stakeholders to advance healthcare, again, as I said, to foster responsible innovation, high quality innovation, and ensure the safety of products. And a key also aspect of some of the work that's going on in the Center of Excellence is to provide regulatory clarity for industry and for stakeholders. I think that predictability and clarity of regulatory requirements is really important to support innovation. And I think there are several activities that have been at the forefront of what the center has been doing. In addition to providing guidance, coming up with proposed regulatory framework and action plans, they've also done a lot of concerted effort to build partnerships and to accelerate digital health advancements, partnerships with our key stakeholders as well as with our regulatory partners. I will touch on a few specific things that the center has been working on. A few years ago, we put out the Digital Health Innovation Action Plan to outline the efforts that FDA has in mind to really reimagine our approach to digital health technologies, to have timely access to high quality, safe, and effective digital health products, and to foster innovation. As part of this plan, we issued a number of goals. We committed to a number of goals. Many of those relate to guidance documents, including one where we provide some more clarity to industry on what is a software as a medical device. There is the definition that you see on the screen. It is software that's intended to be used for one or more medical purposes to perform purposes without being part of the hardware of the medical device. And we issued a guidance to provide additional clarity on this, where we explained what our approach is to device software functions, including mobile medical apps. We also identified the types of mobile platforms and software functions that would fall as into the definition of medical device, as well as those that do not. I think the one that I should emphasize is that our approach is very much risk-based, and this is a theme that you will see across all regulation that and oversight that FDA applies to our products. In this guidance that we issued in 2019, we identified, for example, software functions that are not medical devices, for example, that are intended for healthcare providers to use as educational tools for medical training, functions that are medical devices, but for which FDA intends to use enforcement discretion because of the determination of risk that we have made, as well as medical devices that are indeed the focus of FDA oversight. And these are software functions that control medical devices or mobile apps that control, for example, the delivery of insulin on an insulin pump. So across all these examples that you see in this guidance, again, the theme that's common across these different examples is what is the risk? What is the level of risk that a patient would be subjected to should this medical device software as a medical device not perform the way it is intended to? What is the risk associated with the safety or effectiveness of this product? And depending on that, FDA has made the determination to apply certain types of levels of oversight. And these are all examples that are provided in the guidance document. I think also I should mention the draft guidance that we issued in 2021 on the content of pre-market submissions for device software functions. This is a draft guidance, meaning that it's not final. We typically put out guidances in draft for public comment, and then we take comment, and then we finalize the guidance. I also wanted to touch on this AI ML regulatory framework. This has been an evolving issue for us. I think it started back in 2019, April of 2019, when we issued a discussion paper proposing a regulatory framework for AI ML-based software as a medical device. Following that discussion paper, we conducted a public meeting in 2020, and then earlier, following the public comment and taking input from all of our stakeholders, we have then published an action plan for AI ML-based software as a medical device. I think many of you may recall that in that discussion paper that we issued in 2019, we proposed a total product lifecycle approach. Again, this is a reflection of the types and the nature of AI ML, and simply recognizing that for these types of products, what FDA had proposed is that we expect a commitment from manufacturers of transparency and real-world performance monitoring, as well as periodic updates to FDA on what changes are implemented as part of the what we refer to as a pre-certification change protocol. I think what FDA's intent here was to come up with a framework that allows for these products to continue innovation in this area, to allow for these products to be evaluated even as during their performance, with the expectation that there's constant monitoring from manufacturers and a clear expectation of quality systems and good manufacturing machine learning practices. So the action plan that we issued in 2021 provides a little bit more detail as to our thinking in this area. We highlighted, for example, our intention to develop a proposed regulatory framework for these types of products. The framework would consistent with what we presented in the discussion paper. We also committed to issuing draft guidance on the predetermined change control plan. So I think there will be more that you will see from FDA on this issue. And then wanted to also mention the good machine learning practice developments in this area. FDA issued I'm trying to look for the date. We issued, working with Health Canada and the UK MHRA, jointly identified 10 guiding principles to inform the development of good machine learning practices. And this document is available on our webpage. They are intended to lay the foundation for good machine learning practices to address the unique nature of these products and to cultivate a future growth in this rapidly progressing field. For example, the guiding principles touch on areas related to the expertise that can be leveraged in this total product lifecycle approach that FDA explained in that discussion paper. The guiding principles also talk about good software engineering and security practices that can be implemented. It touches on issues such as data, training data sets or reference data sets, and how do you use those data sets, and the type of data, the best available methods that can be used to develop a reference data set. The guiding principles also talk about model designs and how to tailor those to reflect the intended use of the device, as well as testing to demonstrate that the device performance is clinically relevant or under conditions that are clinically relevant. So we intend for these guiding principles to help adopt good practices that can also be proven, also tailor practices from other sectors so they can be applicable to the medical technology, and to create new practices that are specific for medical technology. And that's the vision that FDA has for these guiding principles. I think it has some good information. I would recommend industry stakeholders who are working in this area to look at those principles that FDA has issued. And again, the Digital Health Center of Excellence has a web page as well as an inbox for you to submit your questions. This is all very high level information that we have provided today. I know it doesn't get into a lot of detail, but the idea here for us was to just introduce some work that's ongoing in this area at FDA, and for you to have some resources that you can go to either at the CDRH website. There's the main homepage. There's also a place where you look for device-specific advice. There are some videos under CDRH Learn, and then an inbox for Division of Interest, Industry and Consumer Education that's within the center, or our office, where you can send your questions, and we'll be sure to refer you to the right people back at headquarters. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jordana or others. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Ritu and Claudia. This has been very informative. I know it's a lot to cover in an hour, but I think you have provided very valuable resources. So we appreciate you being here today. We now have time for some specific questions. Some of them you have touched already, but we wanted to get a little more specific in a few issues. We had a question on site inspections. So somebody asked whether, when do they take place? During the documentation process or later? And which are the specific guidelines or steps that are followed during these inspections? And what type of inspections allow for a medical device single audit program?
Yes, I can touch on that a little bit, and if there are still remaining questions, don't hesitate to get back to us afterwards. We can provide information as well by email. But so for those pre-approval inspections, so prior to the approval of a pre-market application, CDRH will typically issue an inspection assignment for manufacturing sites that are deemed necessary to be inspected. The assignment is issued after the manufacturer has demonstrated in its PMA application that both the design controls and the manufacturing processes and controls have been adequately established. So before initiating the pre-market approval inspection, in other words, the investigator will review the manufacturing section of the PMA application and any other documents that is provided by the Office of Compliance or the Field Operations branch in preparation for the inspection. So it's important to ensure that the manufacturer has completed all process validation activities at the time of the inspection. In terms of the post-market inspections for the PMA, again, it's typically conducted 8 to 12 months after the PMA has been approved, and that's really to ensure that the manufacturer is making the device in accordance with the conditions that are specified in the PMA, and that it complies with the requirements set in all the different regulations. So there are a number of documents that provide some information as to the steps and how to conduct, how those inspections are conducted. So if you, and I can share those links with you afterwards, Jordana, if that can be helpful. There are some compliance programs. One is entitled Inspection of Medical Device Manufacturers, that is intended to help comply with FDA's internal inspection and compliance processes regarding quality system and GMP inspection. There is the compliance program on medical device pre-market approval and post-market inspections for specifically on the PMA. And as regards the quality system, there is the quality system inspection technique, the QSIT, which is really the Bible in terms of how FDA conducts those quality system inspections. And all those links are available on the website, and I'd be happy to share them after this. FDA also published a guidance in 2020 on review and update of device establishment, inspection processes and standards. And here it was following a requirement in the law that required FDA to kind of clarify the schedules, and how to and the communication with manufacturers, and so this guidance also provides some information on the timelines and how those inspections are notified and in what time frame and how long they last, etc. So yes, you also had a question related to MDSAP. So I don't know if everybody is familiar with MDSAP. Do you want to cover it? Okay, so MDSAP is a program that allows so MDSAP recognized auditing organization to conduct a single regulatory audit of a medical device manufacturer that satisfies the relevant requirements of the regulatory authorities that are participating in the program. So it's really an initiative at the international level that FDA has been strongly involved in, and that really aims to have to facilitate a little bit complying with the different regulatory requirements of different authorities. So the participating agencies are Australia, Brazil, Health Canada, Japan, and FDA. There are also some official observers and some affiliate members. And FDA recognizes these MDSAP reports for routine inspections. So it's not pre-approval inspections, but it's really for those routine inspections.
Okay, thank you so much. I was looking, we have another question on clinical research. This is specific for that research that has been performed for products with a CE marking. And the company wants to know what value do they have in the US process.
Yeah, maybe I can start on this one. I mean, I think Claudia touched on this a little bit in her presentation. This goes to clinical investigations that are conducted outside the US. I think for us, there are specific conditions under which we would consider those types of clinical data. We also have a web page on this, on how acceptance of data from clinical investigations from medical devices, and how to generate the clinical data to support medical device applications, whether it's CE marked or not, and some frequently asked questions. So there's information on this on our web page. I think at the end of the day, really what the important point is, whatever the clinical data is that is submitted in support of a submission, it must demonstrate the safety and effectiveness of the product in the conditions of use, customary conditions of use. And, so you want to make sure that the data that you generated using in your clinical trials really represents also the population that you're intending to market it for.
Sure, makes sense. Another question, it's about new products, and specifically for low-risk health products like software-related. In this case, is clinical research required to assure safety and efficiency as well?
Yeah, so I mentioned as well, I think during the presentation, so normally the clinical research is especially for those high-risk products, they're most often conducted to support a PMA, but of course, it depends on the product.
Yeah, and then for the software medical devices, you had some question about whether clinical research is required for that. There is a guidance document for clinical evaluation of software as a medical device, and I think it depends. The degree of evidence you generate really depends on the parameters and the type of product and the specific software as a medical device and its functions. We do have information on our web page on this as well, but this also touches on something that Claudia had talked about, which is IMGRF. A lot of these guidance documents that we developed specifically on software medical device and the emerging issues the recent proposed rule on quality systems regulation. A lot of our thinking is also informed by discussions at the INGRF. FDA takes great efforts and puts a lot of resources into discussing these issues with our fellow regulators at the International Medical Devices Regulators Forum, and we're always looking for opportunities to align to the extent possible. So some of our guidance documents are very much a reflection of discussions at the international forum.
We have an additional question. This is about detentions. Once a product has been detained by customs, is it possible to request a reconsideration by the FDA and not to find this product as a medical device? I guess to change.
That would be I think it would be very case specific, so I hesitate to provide a response to something like that. I think the best course of action on questions like that would be either to submit it on that last slide. We gave a couple of inboxes right to the DICE inbox or to our office, and we'll make sure to refer you to the imports group. Much of the response on something like that depends on the conditions associated with the question. So I think we'll need more information. So I hesitate to give you an answer.
Mm-hmm. But just to note that you need, before you send products, you need to make sure that you actually comply with the FDA requirements. Don't just send your products and.
Yeah, if they've detained, if they've detained, it's likely because it didn't meet all the criteria. They're looking for specific things. Okay, if this is an FDA regulated product, you must have you must meet certain these checklists, right? And if you have not been registered or you haven't been listed or whatever the conditions were that were not met, that caused the detention.
No, absolutely. That's why we're organizing events like this, trying to educate companies, because it's a lot easier to do something right from the beginning than having to solve a problem. Well, doesn't seem like we have any more questions at this time. So we just wanted to thank you again to all the speakers, Ritu, Claudia, Linda. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you to all the companies for joining us today. I think we have over 70 people signed up, and I know many more companies will view this tape later on. But we hope that this event has answered all your questions, and at least some of them, and that you have found it useful. And if anyone has any additional questions, please reach out to me or Azucena, and we will try to answer them. Our office here at Bas Trade and Investment in Washington is here to support your establishment in the US, and we will do our best to assist you with that. So we look forward to helping you, and thank you all. Eskerrik asko.
Thank you very much.